Mrs. Peck, I want you to remain calm. Oh, no, remain calm, Mrs. Peck. Just remain calm. This is just... This goes back on very easily. This is part of the knob. You just tell the repair... This will go right back. Yes, ma'am, I'm leaving. I'm very happy to pay for this. Just... Yes, ma'am, I'm going.
Hello and welcome to Rumpled Trenchcoat, a Columbo podcast for all your Columbo needs. I'm Rich Nocella and I'm here with my sister,
Adrienne Nocella.
And the episode we're talking about today is Double Shock from 1973, the last episode of season 2 of Columbo, starring, of course, Peter Falk as Columbo, and Martin Landau as Dexter Paris, the flamboyant galloping gourmet. And starring Martin Landau as Norman Paris, a boring banker. And starring Julie Newmar as Lisa Chambers, the young new age fiancée of the elderly victim. And Jeanette Nolan as Mrs. Peck, who is never less than 10 seconds away from her head literally exploding.
When I watch this, she's so always at the edge. She's so like irrationally furious. It's not even just like I'm angry. She's just absolutely furious. So it reminded me, what she reminds me of is a percolator. Remember those coffee makers from the 70s and you put them on the stove and it has that like glass knob on top and it's heating up and all of a sudden you just see all the coffee like running through it. Yeah. I'm like, if they did Beauty and the Beast with her, she would be a percolator.
Yeah, she wouldn't be the lovely teapot of Angela Lansbury. No, she'd be a percolator on the verge of boiling over any moment.
She's like a steam whistle.
Yeah.
Like I'm just like, wow.
I mean, her blood pressure must be perfect because she constantly is yelling and just letting off all that pressure. So she must be in excellent health. So we start this episode off at 12 minutes and 30 seconds BC before Columbo. And before we do, I'll just kind of briefly summarize what's going on. What's happening is that we see the nephew of the victim. He wants to kill his very wealthy uncle before he marries his very young fiancée, because then there's an inheritance involved. And so both nephews, in fact, want to get their hands on that $3 million estate. I think.
Wait, do you want me to tell you in money what that is?
Well, how much money
because I look all of that up. Okay, so in today's money, that is $23 million, which is not as much as I thought it was based on his lavish in-home fencing gym. I don't know what is going on.
We'll definitely get to all of that. He's in a flat-out mansion, complete with the servants' quarters. So I don't know. Maybe money went a lot further back then.
Maybe.
Even adjusting for inflation. But you're right. You would think that this would be an estate maybe like 50, 100 million.
Yes.
A lot of money, nothing to sneeze at, but they have to split it both ways because there's two of them. That's basically the idea. They want to murder their uncle before he gets married so that the new wife wouldn't then be the person to inherit the fortune when this elderly man dies. And their plan is to throw an electrical mixer into his tub, kill him, and then dress him up in gym clothes and make it look like he had a heart attack while exercising.
That's the plan.
That's pretty much the plan right there.
Okay, but the uncle should have suspected immediately because the mixer that they were going to just toss in the tub, he's like, oh, here's your wedding gift. Can you imagine getting like that stupid of a wedding gift from your nephew? That's really cheap.
Well, we're kind of glossing over it because we haven't really gone into it yet.
Okay.
But basically, yes, I guess to cut to the chase, the beginning of the episode is one of the nephews is shaving down the wires to the mixer, tossing it into a bucket of water to test it out and seeing a huge like a large electrical shock.
Right.
And then we crash cut to the uncle and the family lawyer fencing. And yeah, it's full on fencing, complete with the buzzer to show when there was a good hit or not a good hit. And all of that is just kind of designed to show us that the uncle, and there's a lot of exposition in a short period of time. Because Dexter, the nephew who's a little more friendly with the family, but also kind of the ne'er-do-well, he has a cooking show.
Yes, it's called The Pleasures of Paris.
Yes, because the last name is Paris, and it is, we'll certainly get to that. But in that scene, we find out that the brothers are on terrible terms, really not even speaking terms with each other.
Yes.
We find out that the uncle is a health nut.
Yes.
We find out that the uncle is going to marry a very young, very beautiful woman that night.
Yes.
And we find out that the other person that the uncle is fencing with is the family lawyer, who's also a business manager. After the exercise in fencing, and because he is getting married, the uncle goes upstairs, takes a bath.
Yes.
Now the nephew walks in with a mixer in a doctor's bag.
Yes.
For some reason.
Yes.
Neither of them are doctors. I don't know
Correct.
why he had that. Pulls out the mixer, and yes, he says, "Hey, I forgot to give you my wedding present."
Yeah.
This mixer from a guy who has a cooking show. I don't know. It's just really strange. And we're kind of glossing over the fact that he's walking in on his uncle in the bathtub, and neither of them find that strange. Like the uncle doesn't say, "Hey, I'm taking a bath here." What?
There's a lot of odd interrelationships in this household, because you have Mrs. Peck, who's the house, I don't know if she's like the housekeeper. She's sort of just like the matriarch, like not the matriarch either. She just is a house manager, maybe.
Well,
she cleans.
I think look, she takes pride in the house being immaculate. My feeling is that she does clean or oversees cleaners, but we never see anybody else but her.
Right.
I think that she's essentially in charge of the house, however you want to define that. She's in charge of making sure the house is clean, everything's well run, and she does a spectacular job. Including
raising these nephews.
Absolutely. Yeah, she was kind of like a live-in nanny to boot.
Right. So she kind of really does everything. So, and we don't really know why she had to raise the nephews. We don't get any really background information on the sister, the mother,
on anybody,
children. Yeah, of anybody. So he comes strolling into his uncle taking a bath.
Right.
And he's like, "Here's my unwrapped wedding gift to you." I'm just taking, like, he's not even in a wrapping, it's not even in a box with a wrapping paper.
No, it's just a mixer.
It's just a mixer. And his uncle's like, "Oh, great, thanks." Thank you. He looked real happy about it.
Well, it's funny because, I think it was nonplussed, which is a fair reaction to your nephew walking in on you taking a bath and showing you a mixer and saying, "Hey, here's my wedding present." So it was kind of like, "Oh, thanks. I don't care much for appliances, but thank you," you know, which is kind of a weird thing to say if somebody gives you a gift. Taking it out of that situation, pretending it was a much more normal situation, like it's at a wedding and you unwrapped the present and it's a mixer, it would be kind of strange to say, "Well, I don't care much for appliances, but thank you." That's kind of an ungrateful thing to say.
I'm sorry, are you implying that the uncle who gets electrocuted in a bathtub is an ingrate?
I kind of am. No.
Okay.
But what I am saying is that was just a strange line and I believe last line for that character to say, as of course demonstrating the appliance. Dexter plugs it into the wall because there's an outlet right by the tub, and then tosses it in the tub. And then you have this kind of great moment where the actor acts electrocuted, and then there's kind of a freeze frame. And then we cut to Mrs. Peck, who's watching TV.
Okay, and correct me if I'm wrong.
Right.
Is she watching a chicken on TV?
Okay.
I know she's watching I know she's watching a soap opera about doctors eventually. But I feel like I'm going to go look it up again, because I feel like when we first go to her TV, she's watching a chicken on TV. And I feel like I wouldn't write that down if it didn't happen. Like, I'm not just going to make up a chicken for flair or to jazz it up. So we need to go to the tape. Go to the tape.
All right, we'll have to go to the tape. I will, if in editing I bounce back in and say, yes, there absolutely was a chicken on there, then you'll know that you're correct. Editor's note. There was no chicken. There was no chicken on the TV. There was no picture of a chicken on the wall. There was no chicken figurine on top of the TV set. A chicken did not wander into frame. The older doctor looked a little like Frank Perdue, who sold chickens, but I honestly have no idea what was going on there. And now back to the show.
I'm telling you, there was an actual chicken on her TV. And I know eventually she's watching a soap opera about doctors.
Okay.
But I'm telling you, it cuts
You know what?
chicken.
Maybe I can't. You know what?
Yes,
I can't
maybe.
dismiss it. I can't dismiss it completely because it's entirely possible. Because the whole idea was she was going to go to her sister's that night.
Yes.
And she got caught up in this soap opera. So either
Right.
she was going to postpone when she was going or even cancel. So she got caught up in this soap opera drama, which was very funnily written because it was really making fun of like Marcus Welby and all these shows where you have
I
the.
don't know that.
Okay, so
Sorry.
there are a whole bunch of shows where you have the young, new doctor, lawyer, police officer, and the older mentor. But this in particular was funny because the older mentor was telling the younger doctor, look, you're not just a star on the gridiron. So he's that young doctor is a football star / doctor. So
Really?
yeah, it's
See, I got so distracted by the actual chicken
by
that
the
I was
actual
there
chick.
that
Fair
I
enough.
missed all of that.
I could understand that would be very distracting, but I had to laugh at that because they were really making fun of all of those types of shows. So very, very melodramatic and over the top, but of course it's right up Mrs. Peck's alley. So she was
Yeah.
watching that. So while she's watching it, while she's in the middle of the show that's caused her to delay the visit to her sister,
Yes.
the TV goes off.
Right.
And so she's understandably upset. She was all caught up in it. Didn't go from zero to furious yet, but she was certainly upset about it, as I think
Well,
anybody might be. She started to
that's
get angry. Yeah.
Yeah, no, she didn't get super upset because the TV's not smoking a cigar.
Yeah. And I have to say, I know we make fun of her. I don't know that she was wrong as I watched this episode again. I think her reactions were over the top, but Columbo was really.
Yeah.
And not even his usual messing with people to mess with them. He was really wrecking her stuff.
He really was.
The whole episode, the entire
Yes.
episode. So, but we'll get to that. So she goes over to the light switch, turns on the light, and the light goes on.
Yes.
So she then turns on the TV, and the TV turns on, but the color has changed to purple. A shortage of electricity damaged the TV because back then there were cathode ray tubes and they it was easy to mess with the TV.
Like back then they had little mice inside your TV on a spinning wheel, and then it would, and so the mouse that was on all the other colors except for purple got shocked.
They got zapped and they had to take a nap. So the only one working was purple. Now we left out a couple of things because I don't think I have to go through the whole mechanics of it. Really, essentially, there's a burglar alarm that Mrs. Peck turns on, that the killer turns off, and we don't know why. So we might as well get to why. I feel at this point, and that is the whole time throughout the murder and the setup, we only see the one nephew, Dexter. They talk about this brother that he hasn't been on speaking terms with for a long time.
Yes.
He even makes a comment to the lawyer that, if you can broker a treaty between me and my brother, they'll appoint you to the Supreme Court. It's clear that there is, and we never find out why.
No.
We it's just another one of those things where these guys just aren't talking to each other, and they haven't for clearly years.
Right.
But they get together on this to kill their uncle.
Yeah. Yeah, they do.
And they're not just brothers, they're identical twin brothers. And that's why Martin Landau plays both roles here. He's playing both the professional, arrogant, snooty Norman Paris and the kind of fun-loving, gregarious cooking show host, Dexter Paris. Dexter Paris wears leisure suits without a tie.
Yes.
Norman very prim and properly dressed in a business suit with the narrow tie of the time.
Yes.
And so the two together, and that's why Dexter had to turn off, or that's why one of them had to turn off the burglar alarm to let the other one into the house. And the key is that both of them had to work together. They couldn't pull this off on their own. And I guess we'll get to that later on as to why, and that's part of how Columbo does figure it out. So after all of that with the TV, now Mrs. Peck doesn't know anything's going on. She just knows she was watching TV. The TV went off. Then the TV was able to get turned back on again, but damaged.
Yes.
And she figured that took about 20 seconds.
Yes.
Then a taxi comes roaring into the house. Mm-hmm. And Catwoman explodes out of it.
I didn't know. I've heard of her before, Julie Newmar.
Yes.
I didn't realize how beautiful she is.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my God. Well, all right, calm down. You just
I know, seriously. I spent a childhood watching Batman on TV, and now we have Catwoman on the scene just leaning over, lifting her legs up, kicking. Yeah. I mean, she was so incredibly animated that she was essentially a cartoon. I mean, she burst in, said, "Lovely to see you. Where is my husband to be?" Because they were about to just go off and get married. That's what she came by to do. She had the taxi to run in, get him, come on out to the taxi, go and get married. And she is kicking, like she's just throwing kicks.
So she is throwing kicks. Would it be funny if they put in like the Batman like kick?
Yeah.
How?
Sock.
Sock. She slides down a banister at one point.
Like half slides down the banister. She is so animated and vibrant.
She's so vibrant. I have to tell you though, I was actually distracted by how incredibly beautiful she is. I had no idea. I don't remember this. Yeah. Do you estimate how much younger she is than the uncle? Do you know?
I don't know.
For sure.
I didn't check the notes. At one point, Mrs. Peck, when commiserating with Dexter, said, "I think it's shocking. She's young enough to be his granddaughter." Yeah. So we're talking about 2 generations younger. This isn't like 8 to 15 years younger. This is much more. No, this is probably 35 to 40 years younger, if you had to guess. I'm guessing that Julie Newmar was supposed to be in her 20s and he was supposed to be in his 60s, if not early. I would say 60s, because back then age was a lot harsher.
Okay.
So that he might have looked in his 70s, but he's probably supposed to be in his 60s would be my guess. Julie Newmar might have been 30 at the time, but was certainly supposed to, I believe, be in her 20s. So that's what I would do. I would have considered it someone in their 20s marrying someone in their 60s.
Okay.
So significant age gap. Significant age gap. We've got an age gap. We got nothing on them.
No.
No. We're brother and sister, so it's a completely different story anyway. But big age gap. Big age gap. To the point that understandably the nephew certainly would have considered her a gold digger. There's no fortune, no question about it. And if it's the other way around, he'd be a fortune hunter.
That's still my favorite thing that I've learned from watching Columbo. Fortune hunter. Leslie Nielsen, fortune hunter.
Now, of course, she goes upstairs. Now, we as an audience think that she's going to find him dead in the bathtub because Julie Newmar Lisa runs up the stairs, does a little kick because Mrs. Peck says he might not be dressed. I mean, they're going to get married that night. Let's not be that Victorian about it.
I know. Calm down, Mrs. Peck.
Mrs. Peck, I know that she's feeling a little jealous. She's worried that Lisa is going to be the new head of the household because it would make sense that a wife would do that. And the victim tries to reassure Mrs. Peck, saying, "Look, Lisa would want you to keep being the head of the household. Your position is safe here. Don't worry about your job or anything." But she is Mrs. Peck is very domineering, of course. That's character. And that's when Lisa says, "Oh, you think we're a couple of kids?" And she does a little kick on the stairs, and then she runs up the rest of the way. Yeah. But he's not in the bathtub.
No.
And so that's when Lisa comes down, half slides down the banister, and then goes to the gym thinking, "Oh, I just got him a new electric exercise bike. He's probably on that." So they go to the gym. He was on the electric exercise bike.
Yeah.
but dead and draped over it, and actually kind of a really disturbing scene.
I actually wrote that down. This
You did,
is
yeah.
that's like out of a horror movie.
Absolutely.
That's out of a horror. It was a pretty I don't know if grotesque is the right word. It's
Well,
not
morbid,
gory,
least.
but it's
Yeah.
it's a little over the top for Columbo. You know, it's not bloody, but he is on a self-propelled exercise bike, which I didn't know was a
Yes.
thing either. Do they still make that? How does that exercise you if it
Okay.
runs on its own? I have lots
Okay.
of questions.
And I knew you would, because
Okay.
that's definitely a generational thing.
Okay.
That there was a lot of exercise equipment in the 70s that kind of mistook the concept of exercise, and they thought as long as you were being taken through the paces of exercise, it was the same as exercise. And that's why you had those belts that would go around your waist and vibrate.
Okay. I've seen those.
Okay. Same thing with this. You would still pedal, so you would still get exercise, but the arms would move back and forth electrically, so that you would, I guess, just the mere act of holding on to it, you would be kind of doing rows, almost like rowing a bike.
Oh, okay. So that's better than I thought, because I thought the pedals were moving on their own also, but they don't. So you're pedaling, but the handlebars go up and down.
That was my impression, but it's entirely possible that the pedals were moving too, because again, at that time, there was that whole, if you're just getting on a machine that's moving, you're doing exercise. So,
but then why didn't everyone just go ride roller coasters?
Because the rolling, well, first of all, you got me. Second of all, they were focusing on muscle groups.
Oh, okay.
So clearly they don't do it now because it's nonsense. It's not, it's not anything. I mean, a treadmill works because you have to walk to stay on the treadmill. Yes. It's not like you're sitting down and your feet are being pushed back and forth, So they eventually realized that didn't really do as much as it could, that you're better off riding an exercise bike than you are sitting on one that's moving.
Okay.
But to get back to what they see, it's really disturbing because he's draped over the handlebars that are moving back and forth. And you're right, it really seemed like the movie's version of a Tales from the Crypt, where you just have this kind of macabre scene.
Yeah.
I mean, her fiance, the man that she loved, is dead, and very undignified and just continuing to move back and forth. It was it would have been so much less disturbing if he was just laying on the floor, but instead he's on this really kind of horrific scene. I mean, it's like you said, for Columbo, it was quite a bit.
Yes.
And so, of course, they scream. And, now, I mean, Mrs. Peck looks shocked but composed, but obviously upset. She's seeing her master essentially dead. And Lisa is seeing her fiance that she was just about to collect to go into a cab and get married is now dead in this really disturbing scene. Yeah. So now we finally have Columbo entering the scene here.
Yes.
Police Department, Lieutenant Columbo. Would you mind if I came in?
And you have Dabney Coleman as the sergeant.
I love Dabney Coleman.
Yeah, me too.
I love Dabney. I love him. Here's what I remember him from: Cloak and Dagger.
Yes. And
9 to 5. And I'm basing my love of him on those two movies.
And that's fair. Because both of those are excellent movies. I, of course, also remember him from War Games.
Is that Matthew Broderick?
Yes.
Oh, I know that one too. Yeah, I know that one then.
Yep.
Was there a chicken in War Games as well? Was there a purple doctor?
There was not a purple doctor. There probably was a chicken.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And there most certainly was a helicopter that somehow surprised them, which I always have to laugh at movies.
I don't remember the movie enough to know that reference, but that's funny.
Just like so many other movies, it's like two characters talking and then all of a sudden helicopter. It's like, yeah, you would have heard that like 50 miles away, but it's like, oh, here's a helicopter, let's run. But there was that, and then of course there was Buffalo Bill, which was a TV show where he was a radio host with Gina Davis as one of her first, if not her first, role on that. But that was another great show that he was on.
I have no memory of that. I don't think I've ever heard of that.
It's sad. It's kind of lost to time. People just don't talk about it anymore. But it was a very good show. In any case, he's doing his best Burt Reynolds impression.
He is. He is. Yes.
He's got the big handlebar mustache, and he's chewing gum and just kind of looking around furtively, all over the place like he's too cool to be in the room. I mean, his part is virtually non-existent, but I do love him, so it was fun to see him in that. So anyway, Dabney Coleman is escorting Lisa Chambers out, who's crying. He takes Columbo's handkerchief to comfort her, and Columbo, again, now almost always has to have some kind of gimmick. So once again, he's just exhausted. So he is just tired and yawning and walking around in a daze, and his tie is undone, and he goes into the house, and he and Dabney Coleman talk for a brief bit where they just basically get the idea like, hey, there's this old man who had a heart attack while exercising. And Columbo's like, well, why are we here? And that's when Dabney Coleman says, well, the fiance says, hey, everybody's after this guy's money, and she thinks he was way too healthy to just have a heart attack riding a bike, which if all you're doing is sitting on it and she's got a point. So then as they go to the scene where the body was, Columbo has a little aside like, wait, did she just keep my handkerchief?
I don't remember that. That's funny.
Yeah. And David Coleman says, I don't know. So it was pretty clear that was a Peter Falk ad lib. We now have Columbo in a daze, leaning over the exercise bike or looking at it. The medical examiner is getting on the bike to show Columbo what it looked like.
Yes.
And so then Columbo, being so tired, and Mrs. Peck is answering some questions in the background, but in the foreground, Columbo absentmindedly flicks some cigar ashes on the floor.
Again, like you were saying, that's outrageous.
That's really, really repulsive. That's something that, you know, like if he thought Mrs. Peck was the killer, everything he did would make sense this episode.
But like to walk into somebody's house smoking, certainly now is very different. But back then, walking into somebody's house smoking is one thing. Smoking a cigar is a whole different thing. Yeah. But then actually ashing on the floor. And we should note, this is a crime scene.
Yes. So once again, he's not worried about contaminating a crime scene. As you said, he just wants to solve the puzzle. He doesn't even care about convictions at this point. I'm inclined to agree. So he flicks some cigar ashes on the floor where the body was, because he was doing it while leaning on the exercise bike. And Mrs. Peck absolutely, I feel, rightfully loses her mind, but clearly she's over the top a little bit. And she yells like, you belong in a pigsty.
She is right this time. Right. This time she's right.
I can't really argue with her on this time. Yes. Because then Columbo, who's still half asleep, gets flustered and says, oh, I didn't even realize I did that. Let me help. And then he's accidentally grinding the ashes into the floor. And she's telling him, you're grinding the ashes in. And so Columbo says, well, let's get a little water on that. And then he dumps the tray with the pitcher on it and breaks the pitcher. So he's completely destroyed that crime scene. He might as well have just gone in with a fistful of Roman candles and just set them off in the room. He's completely destroyed that crime scene. And she kicks Columbo out. She said, get him out of here.
Yeah, which I don't think probably could happen, but that is funny.
No. I mean, he gets kicked out so many times.
He does get kicked.
In fact, I think the subtitle should have been Double Shock, Columbo Get Out. Because there isn't a location in this episode that he isn't kicked out by somebody. So he goes upstairs to the upstairs bathroom to splash some water on his face to wake up, because he knows that he kind of blew it bad there. And he goes to dry his face off, and then something bothers him. And so he starts looking around the room a little bit. He opens the laundry hamper and finds a large bath towel in the hamper. Now, we don't know it at the time, but it's damp.
Right. So, and I think what bothers him is that it's asymmetrical, right? Because there's a pair of bathroom towels on one towel holder, and on the other one, there's only one towel.
Yes. And as we'd seen, Mrs. Peck is absolutely meticulous. That would not have happened.
Right.
He then goes over to the tub, and the soap he tries to pick up, and it slips out of his hand, letting us know that the soap is a little damp. So a lot of exposition to realize that somebody took a bath relatively recently.
Yeah.
And I liked it as a nice little final touch. He starts to tie his tie. So it's like, okay, Columbo's back.
Yeah. Okay.
Columbo's back. He was out of it, and now he's back because now he's realized, oh, something funny is going on.
Something's off. Yeah.
And he starts to tie his tie as he walks out of the room, still smoking his cigar, by the way. now he's getting cigar smoke in their bathroom.
Yep.
So he comes downstairs, and now Dexter is on the scene. The one nephew is on the scene talking with police and Mrs. Peck. And what's funny is how fast he reverses himself, because he's basically saying, I don't understand. My uncle was the picture of health. He couldn't have had a heart attack. And then not less than 10 minutes later, it's like, well, why can't this old man have had a heart attack? So
Right. Yes.
But Columbo comes downstairs with the damp bath towel in his hand.
Yeah, he does.
And he looks at Mrs. Peck, and he's like, oh, I'm glad you're here, Dexter, because your Mrs. Peck and I got into a little thing here. And then Columbo looks at his cigar and goes over to the fireplace and dumps the ash, flicks the ash into the fireplace. And Dexter understandably asks him about the towel.
Why are you coming downstairs with a towel? Yes.
Yes, pretty much. Columbo says, well, look, this towel was in the hamper and it was damp. And immediately Mrs. Peck says, them's fighting words.
Yeah.
Because she says, I'm telling you, by 4 o'clock, all of the towels were dried and put away and blah, 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 blah. And Columbo's like, yeah, I know, but they weren't. And that's a problem. That's the issue. I believe you that everything was perfect, but now we're looking at clearly somebody taking a bath. And so where Columbo is now hung up, and there's always something Columbo gets hung up on. Where he's hung up is he knows that the uncle was doing fencing and doing heavy exercise. He suspects through a lot of circumstantial evidence that the uncle took a bath.
Right.
Then why would he then go downstairs and do more exercise?
That's a really good thing to get hung up on, though.
And it's a really good thing to get on.
Because you know what Judge Judy always says, and I do live by this. I love Judge Judy. She always says, if it doesn't make sense, it's not true.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm being really serious. Like, that's really good, but that doesn't make sense. Why would and there could be a reason for it, but why would somebody exercise when they're going to get married that evening?
Yes.
Bathe and then re-exercise again.
Yeah. And that doesn't make sense, no matter how much of a health nut he is.
Right.
Including getting back in gym clothes. We didn't mention it, but he was found in gym clothes.
Yeah, he had his little tracksuit on.
Yeah, he had a nice little blue tracksuit on.
Yep.
Not velour, but that's because he was old money as opposed to new money, so it was just a regular tracksuit. That's a pretty significant thing to get caught up on. At that, Columbo wants an autopsy because he does not believe that this man had a simple heart attack.
Right.
Dabney Coleman tells Columbo that they found a footprint of a person not wearing a shoe outside the window of Mrs. Peck's bedroom.
Right.
We left it out in telling the story because there were so many details that it wasn't necessary. But at one point, he peeked in the window to make sure Mrs. Peck was watching TV so that she wouldn't be part of any of this or get in the way. And that the person who left the footprint had flat feet. And so okay, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, I have something to say about flat feet. So I laughed when they were talking about flat feet on Columbo because that was a thing that I completely forgot about. I remember growing up, Dad talking about flat feet a lot for some reason. I'm not sure why, but he talked about flat feet quite a bit. And then when I was growing up, also when I was very young, I remember in dance class, my dance teacher would talk about flat feet. So it was like a thing and sort of like I heard about it maybe straight through like 1985 and then never again. Never. No one ever talks about it. It's like the whole thing with like quicksand, how everyone talks about.
I was just going to say, so it was the quicksand of feet. Yes, you heard about it. Yeah.
It was thing. I feel like my pediatrician would be like, oh no, her arches are okay. Like, what? Why was this a thing that was so discussed? But let me ask you this. Do you ever comment on your patient's arches?
No.
Okay.
I certainly don't, unless they're there specifically with foot problems. And then,
Okay.
there have been people who have had plantar fasciitis, which is an irritation of the fascia, the soft tissue that connects the muscles just running underneath the feet. And so if you have a high arch but a flat shoe, then every step your foot's being stretched. And so for them, so it's kind of the opposite. They didn't have
Right.
flat feet. They needed inserts for their shoes. And when they got them, the problem went away forever. But that's the only
Oh.
time I would talk about feet. I certainly wouldn't comment on somebody's arches.
And like as part of a physical, right? For
Right.
for like, I don't know if you're doing physical for kids sports teams or anything like that. Like, is there a checkoff box for like diagnosis flat feet?
No.
Okay. Well, do you remember flat feet discussions growing up, or is this just something I've invented, maybe like the chicken?
I don't think he's invented them. I'm gonna say the chicken's probably real, but I don't think he invented the flat feet thing. It wasn't as big an issue for
Okay.
me, but I definitely remember hearing people talk like I had forgotten the phrase flat feet existed,
Yes.
including how that used to be an insult for police, like, hey, flatfoot, yeah, see? Because, people associated it with walking around too much or being on your
Right.
feet all day. So it was definitely a thing. It may not have been quite as much a thing for me as it was for you. You might have grown up in that window where, like, when I was growing up, it wasn't thought of. And
Okay.
then they, every so often they focus hard on something, especially because you were in dance and everything. So, that absolutely could have been, a thing. But it is funny because I kind of forgot the concept of flat
Yes.
feet until we rewatched this episode where Columbo then extraordinarily clumsily tries to finesse Dexter out of his shoe. Where Columbo brags about how he's got good arches, and he sits down on the hamper and starts to take off his shoes. Says, "Come on, let's compare arches. I'll show you.
Yes.
I bet I have a better arch than you."
Yeah.
And Dexter says, "Columbo, I have flat feet."
But
So
now
it's
I do have a question though.
yes.
My question is, I didn't know that he took off his shoe. I thought you could just tell someone has a flat foot with the
No.
way the shoe pattern wears. So then why did he take off his shoes?
I don't know. That
Oh,
was bizarre. I know that they made a point of showing his foot. I don't know if he was trying to be quiet and took off his shoe. I
okay.
don't even remember the close up on the foot being a sock instead of a shoe, but I would have to have been. He wasn't in bare feet.
No, because I don't remember him being without shoes at all. So it didn't stand out to me. I mean, I'm sure he is, but it didn't stand out to me.
It didn't either, and that was such an odd detail that it just didn't even click in my brain. I think they just wanted to have some kind of semi-identifying thing at the crime scene,
Right.
because when Columbo was kind of acting like, "Oh, really? You've got a flat foot, huh?"
Yes.
And then that's when Norman enters, and for the audience, this is the first time we see that brother that has been absent from the scene and absent from his other brother's life is an identical twin. We mentioned it
Yes.
earlier, but this is now easily 20-25 minutes into the episode before
Right.
we realize that Martin Landau is playing both roles and that this is an identical twin brother, not just a brother.
Right.
And, right off the bat, Norman is saying, yeah, you know what, Dexter probably did kill him if you think that there's,
Yes.
if you think there's a problem.
Yeah.
And Dexter says, well, we are identical twin brothers, and we also both have flat feet.
Yes.
So now this turns from a how catch him to a who done it, because
Yeah.
now we've got two potential murderers here, or
Right.
one, we're supposed to think one of them is the murderer
Yes.
at this point, and we're not sure who because they're identical twins.
Right.
And that's kind of where that would probably have been a commercial break, or something would have ended on that moment.
Yes. What's next is, I believe Columbo goes and meets with Norman at the bank, and Norman talks about how he's got no motive because he's financially independent himself.
Right. Yeah, Norman, to make their personalities different, Norman is very cold, but also honest to an absurd degree.
Yes.
So that he said, I wouldn't have to murder my uncle. I could just embezzle because I'm a vice president of the bank, So I really have no reason to murder my uncle and I think that's when we find out that it's at $3 million to be split, or I guess it doesn't matter when we found that out. But in that ballpark, we have a scene where, because they're at the bank, they're counting off $500,000 in cash, just to kind of set the scene that Norman's a banker and Columbo's with him, and Columbo's nervous around all that money.
Yeah.
And so he ends it, Norman, by saying, now, if you'll excuse me, I have 47 minutes to catch a flight.
Yes.
Which in itself is funny because in the digital clock age, that's not so ridiculous.
Right.
But back then, when every clock was analog, it was always quarter to this, half past that. Maybe it would have said 45 minutes. To say 47 was just a real cheap shortcut to say, okay, this man is very precise and very prim and to a certain degree very arrogant. The other thing that comes across is he completely is throwing Dexter under the bus again. He's saying Dexter is a parasite. He can't wait to get his hands on his uncle's money. Right. Which again, I mean, Dexter drove off in a Ferrari, in a convertible. He's got a cooking show. I don't know how much of I don't know if he's a spendthrift, but
yeah, I think that was the implication.
Okay,
that he does live above his means.
Okay,
that was the
That
implication.
would make sense. Okay.
Yeah.
So what I was interpreting as, gee, he doesn't need the money, was more like, oh no, he needs the money because he's spending much more than he has. Okay, you know what? That makes sense to me more now. Columbo shows up at Lisa Chambers' place.
Yes.
She is doing some form of yoga where she's basically lying down on her head with her body straight up in the air.
Right.
Feeding her brain blood, because Columbo says, doesn't the blood rush to your brain? She says, yes, that's the whole point of it. Feed my brain at least twice a day. So she invites him closer. He's far from embarrassed. He's not quite ogling, but he's definitely somewhere in between. She says, I hope you don't mind that I'm doing this exercise. He says, oh no, I like watching. It's like, again, that's not Columbo. But I guess maybe at this point that's not Columbo so much that maybe the episode with the artist was not Columbo. And
was a one-off.
It's a lech, But I'd rather not think of him that way. So anyway, he talks to her. Just really all we get from all of this, except for the very end, is that she knows Dexter a little bit because she met him a few times. She never even met Norman. Right. And that as far as she knows, they don't talk to each other. Excuse me. They're not on good terms. Just again, reinforcing that. She tells us a little about her relationship, that basically she was in love with the victim on a spiritual level and a physical level, that basically that they were both health nuts. A little somewhere in the episode, they said that whole home gym was a storage room 3 months ago.
Okay.
So you get the idea that over the past 3 months, he became very health conscious before he died. Yes. So he probably was not a health nut his whole life. And then all of a sudden, you find the right person for you. And now he's all right. Let's get this storage cleared up. Let's put in some exercise equipment, a fencing thing, just all that stuff.
I'm going to eat a health cookie. I don't even know what that is. I'm going to eat a health cookie.
What's important, and we don't know it at the time, is she starts to get a little flustered and says, what am I, a suspect? And Columbo says, no, you're actually the only one without a motive. You would have done much better if he lived, because if you had gotten married, you would have inherited everything. And she kicks him out. That's her moment to kick him out of her.
She does kick him out.
Yeah. And she has a right to, because she flat out said, it's very polite. She was very angry but controlled.
If I demanded that you leave this house right now, would you have to?
Well, I'm not sure, ma'am. Is there something or something that you're afraid that I might ask you about?
It's just that I request on my rights that you please leave this house.
Certainly, ma'am.
Her response is probably normal. It was like, look, I want you to go.
Right.
Can I make you go? Or
right.
You have to, can I ask you to leave?
Right.
And he apologizes because he realizes he upset her, but he doesn't know what he said to bother her.
Yes.
But he does, of course, leave.
Right.
So then he's at the cooking show. Then Columbo's in the audience of the cooking show. And so Dexter's up there. He's kind of galloping gourmeting it. Do you know the galloping gourmet? I've mentioned that twice now. It occurred to me that maybe he was well before your time.
No, I don't know the galloping gourmet.
So before there was Rachel Ray, who now it's probably already before people's time, before there was any of these shows, there was Julia Child and there was the Galloping Gourmet. And he was a very flamboyant, fun, joy of cooking type of guy. Everything he cooked was like 4 pounds of butter and everything like. And then many years later in his life, he had a comeback in his career where he took all of his old recipes and then made them healthy. So in 1970 something, I made this with like 4 sticks of butter and a cup of lard, and now you can make that same recipe but this way, and it's much healthier. So it was actually really interesting. I liked him quite a bit, and I am sure that this was more than a nod to the Galloping Gourmet.
Okay.
The pleasures of Paris.
Which is stupid. I'm going to tell you why it's stupid. That's harsh. It's a silly name because that's not even a phrase.
No.
So if you're going to make a play on the word Paris, why would you choose something that's not even in the vernacular of anybody?
Yeah. Why not, an afternoon in Paris? Because it's an afternoon show. Anything would have been better than the pleasures of Paris. People don't say, "Oh, Paris. Oh, let's talk about the pleasures of Paris."
It was just so. I was like, this is awful.
It was just terrible. And so this is now the killer's time to make Columbo look foolish. There were whole seasons where the killer gets one opportunity to make Columbo look a little silly.
Right.
So Dexter points Columbo out in the audience to come on up on stage to do some cooking with him.
Right.
I have to say, in retrospect, because I had amped myself up to remembering how much I hated this, that it actually wasn't that bad. And it was actually a little charming after all. But it was still a 5-minute waste of time. It was waste.
Just like Dagger of the Mind, where I was like, I hate it because they shout the whole time. And I do feel somewhat vindicated because they do shout the whole time, but I did get a little past it.
Yeah.
You just, the minute I feel like we started this podcast, talked about as we approach this episode, the cooking segment you hated.
Yes.
And it was it's just Columbo cracking an egg.
Yeah.
For about 5 minutes straight.
It was absolutely 5 to 8 minutes of Columbo saying,
Yeah.
and Martin Landau laughing.
You must do a little cooking at home, huh? What? You're doing very well, though, I must say. Very.
Thank you.
Can't you say anything else, Lieutenant? I think that's great. You amuse me, Lieutenant.
And to be fair, yes, I have to admit it was kind of cute. It was at least a cute little Columbo moment. And I don't know why it bothered me so much. I guess when I first saw this episode, I'm like, get back to the crime. What's going on here? What do I was impatient. This was certainly a cute scene. There really wasn't much wrong with it, except that it could be completely cut out of the episode. Right. And I do know there are some people who love that scene. I do remember Mom watching it with me and saying, what is he doing? So anyway, moving on. All of that was fun filler, and I could say it was fun filler, but it was absolutely filler. He could have just shown up as the show was wrapping up to talk to him, but Columbo then, after the show, he's nervous. He's like, hey, I hope it did a good job or whatever. That was exhilarating, blah, blah, blah. Oh, my wife uses all of your recipes, and it always is a disaster, and she follows them to the letter, never comes out right. I think it's because she doesn't use the right equipment. Can you recommend equipment like a mixer?
Yeah.
So again, it was a very clumsy way to get to, I'm already on to you.
Right.
I think somebody threw an electrical appliance in this guy's bathtub. He doesn't say it, these words, but he's like, and it's interesting because you ordered 2 mixers just a little bit ago from your show. And that's when Dexter says, "Oh, my brother put you up to this, didn't he?" And he went and showed Columbo the 2 mixers that he had ordered that were still in their original wrapping and packaging. So it wasn't either of those 2 mixers. I guess it could have been from any place. But it's funny because Dexter does say, "I can't recommend brand names." But when he has Columbo up on the stage, he says, "This is the Dexter 9000 blender." So he has his own line of...
His own line of... That's when I said it's even more of a clunker wedding gift, because it's like you're giving somebody something that has your name on it. It's his line of cookware. So he's not, he's not paying for it.
No, exactly.
It's not like he's buying a KitchenAid or a Cuisinart.
It would be if I gave you a tongue depressor for Christmas.
Please don't.
No, I
don't want that.
No, but it would be about the equivalent.
Yes, it would be the same. But just for future reference, don't do that.
No, but they make good stocking stuffers. So, but all right, I won't.
No.
I won't.
You can give me a gift card to a tongue depressor. I'll take that.
Visa cards for all your tongue depressor needs. So we clumsily got past that.
Yes.
And Dexter gets so mad at his brother for implicating him that he says to Columbo, "I'll bet he told you that he was going to fly to a business meeting."
Right.
And he does an impression of Norman.
Yes.
Which is very funny because, of course, he's doing an impression of himself doing an impression of Norman. He's basically just becoming Norman for that moment. But it is funny to see him do an impression of Norman. And, of course, it's good because it is him. He's speaking as him, including winding it up with, "Now, if you excuse me," and looking at his wristwatch saying, "I have to go to blah, blah, blah." Right. And Columbo said, "That's exactly what he said and what he did." And so Dexter insists that Columbo accompanies him. And again, I guess you could just hop on a flight because they just both hopped on a flight to Las Vegas.
Yeah. It is funny because it is just sort of like catching a bus. When you watch it, it's just sort of like you have a bus schedule and you go to the stop and then you wait. So it's just, let me just drive to the airport and hop on a plane.
It's like, I missed this flight. All right, I guess I have to wait a half an hour for the next. It's just amazing. So they get to Las Vegas.
Yes.
And Columbo at no point asks on the flight to Las Vegas, "Why are we going to Las Vegas?" Because your brother told me he had a business meeting, I don't know, San Francisco. I can't remember where it was, just a different place. Right. So Columbo gets out and it's like he's surprised he's in Las Vegas. So you could apparently buy a ticket and not even know where you're going. And so, of course, they go into a casino, and that's where they see Norman shooting craps at a craps table. Yes. So he lied to Columbo about where he was going, and that this is what he does. Apparently, every Wednesday he gambles. Right. Norman. And so Dexter pretends to be Norman at the cashier's desk. And the cashier says, "Oh, this is the first time in 3 years I'd seen you without a tie." So that also means that Norman has been doing this for at least 3 years. Yes. He's been going every Wednesday. So this is another episode where they leak. Some are a little more clumsy and they just dump exposition, but a lot of it is just little kind of leaked info here or there. You kind of gather up that, he's clearly a regular at this casino. Right. And Dexter, again impersonating Norman, is pretending that Columbo is going to pay off his bill, and Columbo, instead of saying, "Wait, this man is impersonating his brother and we're obtaining information illegally," says, "Yeah, I'll do it. I just want to know how much he owes." Yeah. And she goes over the cashier and says that Norman owes $37,500 to the casino, and that's just this casino. Who knows how many places he goes to? I'm going to ask, did you look up how much that?
Of course I looked it up. I looked up, as an aside, I looked up how much $500,000 was when they were in the bank. It's $4 million. Okay, so I would be nervous in a room with $4 million in cash. This is $300,000.
That is a lot of money to owe a casino.
And like you said, it's one casino. So this is what he owes one casino. And, he is a bank president or a bank executive.
It's very funny you say that, because I noticed that he was standing next to the sign that has his name and said vice president. So he's a vice president of the bank. Yeah.
So he's
high up. Yeah.
So he's real high up, but that's also not like a hedge fund manager. It's not, like you
No.
don't sneeze away at 300 grand.
No, that is a lot of money. And as Norman had said during his speech, why I don't have to kill my uncle for money, he says he
Right.
doesn't have a wife, he doesn't have kids.
Right.
So he's just spending enough money to owe 300,000 to the casino.
Yeah.
And at some point, I guess the casino knows that he'll continue to lose money, but if he's not paying it, like at some point you think they would cut him off.
I don't really know how gambling works because I don't know.
Gotcha.
I don't know at what point like Joe Pesci shows up and you're in trouble. Like I don't know.
Yeah. That would at least give him more of a motive. If he was worried that Joe Pesci was going to show up. So he's nabbed at the craps table. Dexter even bets against Norman and wins.
Yes, I know, he's such a jerk.
He's really such an ass.
I forgot about that.
He actually bets don't pass,
and
Norman bets pass, and then he gets an 8, and then he gets a 7 and loses. So Norman, Dexter actually made like probably $1,000 because it was like chips of a stack of hundreds chips. So he probably made like a nice chunk of change on his brother, who now owes even more money to that casino.
Yes.
So after that, they kind of now just are at the house again. They're back to LA. They're back to the house of the victim, Mrs. Peck. The lawyer is now there.
Right.
And the lawyer and everybody is going through a large inventory of really beautiful pieces of art and acquisitions that the victim had made throughout his life, because the lawyer is also the executor of the estate. Right. So he is taking inventory to see how much this estate is actually worth, so that it can be distributed among the nephews. So Columbo is, of course, among all of this artwork, picking things up, handling them, looking at them, walking in there with a cigar. So he's, again, actively smoking in their house. Yes. Now, how many episodes does he have that cigar and it's never lit? In this episode, he's like smoking it every time you see him in the house, only in the house.
And the lawyer is handling all of these artifacts and antiques with gloves on.
Yes.
So it's almost like museum level quality.
Absolutely.
That he's handling everything. And then Columbo just comes in with a lit cigar.
With a lit cigar and just picking it up and looking at stuff. Now, as Columbo's talking to the lawyer, he asks his opinion of the nephews. And the lawyer says, well, Dexter's useless and Norman's pompous.
I know.
So he just completely trashes them to not just a stranger, but to a homicide lieutenant.
Yes, he knows that they're getting he knows that he's there to investigate a murder.
Yes.
And so now if somebody's investigating a murder and asks you about the character of two people who are related to the victim, he's very free with being like, they're both the worst.
Yeah, he basically says, look, either one of them probably did it.
Yes.
And so, again, rightfully, Mrs. Peck steps between the two, pretends to look at an item, put it down, and glare at the lawyer. As she should. I mean, that was... And then, after she leaves, the lawyer says, she practically raised those kids. So he's basically saying she was incompetent for raising a useless guy and a pompous ass.
Yep.
So the lawyer, I kind of like the lawyer in this. He's just he's really not holding back here.
No.
Then the lawyer just flat out asks Columbo, so which one do you think did it?
Yeah.
And Columbo says, excuse me? He says, no, come on. Then Columbo and the lawyer have a funny, in quotation marks, little banter where the lawyer's like, well, hey, don't you suspect me?
Well, thank you very much for your courtesy, Mr. Hathaway. Believe me, we're going to check out every possibility.
Including myself, I trust. I wouldn't want to feel slighted.
Well, to be frank, sir, we haven't slighted you. Well, we checked out where you went after your fencing match with Mr. Paris, and you really couldn't have killed anybody from that attorney's banquet.
Well, it's always flattering to be considered, however briefly.
Right. Of course, you could have had him killed. But I really don't put you very high on the list of suspects. Nice talking.
The lawyer realized, oops, I'm kind of playing with fire here. Maybe I better not be quite so glib.
That was actually really good.
It was great because Columbo will take only so much, and then he had to put the lawyer back in his place a little bit. And then after Columbo had that triumphant kind of little gotcha moment, he immediately puts a cigar out in a silver bowl.
It's probably like Marie Antoinette's. You know what I mean?
It was what caught her head, as she fell. And so that's when Mrs. Peck says, "You're a bum.
Yeah.
You're a bum.
Yeah.
You put out this stinking cigar in this priceless silver bowl," and she runs away with it to try and clean it. And Columbo's like, I thought it was an ashtray. We got one just like it at home." So she goes to clean out the ashtray, and she and Columbo have a moment where Columbo just kind of monologues.
"Mrs. Peck, I made a very poor introduction of myself to you. I know that. I'm a stranger in your house that you love, and I'm here to do something that's not very pleasant, so I don't expect you to like me, but I have feelings too, Mrs. Peck. Now, I'm sorry about being untidy. That's something that I can't control. That's a fault of mine that I don't know. I just can't correct that, and I've tried many years. I'm just very untidy. That's my nature. But I've never been rude to you, Mrs. Peck. And if you keep on treating me like I'm an enemy just because I'm here trying to find who killed the man that you worked for 33 years, well then I think you're a very unfair person."
You're being an unfair person, but he's also destroying everything he touches. I know her reaction may be over the top, but he is wrong.
He is wrong.
Yeah.
He is wrong because, again, those were all heirlooms and artifacts and antiques. Yes. And it's why would you walk into the house with a cigar lit again?
That was my whole point. Why a second time? Yeah. It was bad enough to do it the first time. You already know it's an issue. Why would you walk in? And we'd seen him put his cigar in his pocket before. Yes. We'd seen him do these things where it's like he did not have to. And maybe he was even thinking, "Oh, I won't put the ashes on the floor. I'll put them in this ashtray."
Oh, that's definitely what he was thinking.
Yes, but why walk in? He did not have to walk into that house with a lit cigar.
No.
It was not something he needed to do.
No.
So then he walks away. She's kind of puffy, and then she turns and says,
"Lieutenant, I know that you're a very hard-working officer, and I would like to offer you a plate of Mr. Paris's favorite health cookies and a glass of milk."
"Well, thank you. I'm extremely fond of health cookies."
And Columbo is not a fan of the health cookies.
He's not a fan of the health cookies, but he did enjoy the milk.
Yes.
And that's when he talks with Mrs. Peck. He finds out that the TV was off maybe only 20 seconds. That's when he finds out that the color was off. And so before she calls a repairman, that he would help her with the TV. Yeah. And, he's starting to make some adjustments, and he pulls the knob right off the TV. And that truce has been dissolved.
Yes. So I'll say this. Ready? Maybe we can rate her outburst thus far.
Fair enough.
First outburst when he's hovering over I don't know if the guy's still on the ground, the corpse of her employer.
He can't have been because he was on the bike. I'm assuming they removed the body by the time he got there, and that's why the coroner had to show him where it was positioned.
Okay. So in either case, he does fully ash on the floor.
Yes.
That is like a pigsty. That is like, "Do you live in a bar?" comment for sure.
Honestly, absolutely. No, nobody would flick ashes on their own floor unless there was something deeply wrong with them. Yeah.
Right. So he does that and then immediately breaks and pours water from a pitcher. That is something I'd be unhappy about.
Yes.
And would probably, if I ever felt okay yelling at a police officer who's investigating a homicide, I would yell at that.
Yes.
But I probably wouldn't yell at anybody.
You must belong in some pigsty. Do you do that in your own home? Do you?
I'm sorry, ma'am. Forgive me. I'm awfully sorry. I didn't realize that I was
Lieutenant, this is Mrs. Peck.
Dropping ashes.
Paris's
terribly sorry.
Stinking
Let me see
cigar on my... Stop that! You're rubbing it in!
Oh, forgive me, ma'am. I didn't realize, sometimes it's a habit. Let me see if I can clean that up.
Here.
What I'll do is I'll take this spray and I'll...
You broke Mr. Paris's pitcher!
Then this time around, he discards his ashes in an antique silver bowl that they're appraising.
Yes, they're
for
actively
the estate.
Appraising this for the estate. Yes.
And he is an officer. He is a detective, so he's seemingly observant, and we know Columbo's observant. So we know that this is important because the attorney is handling them with gloves, right? So that's not lost on Columbo. So he ashes on that.
Bum! You're a bum! Putting your stinking cigar butt in this silver antique dish! Do you see this? Oh.
I thought it was an ashtray. I have one at home that looks exactly like that.
I don't know if you should lose your mind to that extent, but I'd be like, this guy, I'm like, you really can't come in here with a cigar again. Right. Because now you're affecting my inheritance.
Right. Well, and of course, the subtext is like everything else, it's not so much about what's happening as about what's beneath it all, which is that she's really mourning the loss of this man that she loved and respected. And this buffoon is now literally desecrating everything. He's putting ashes on the floor of his gym. He's putting ashes in the silver ashtray. Mm-hmm. So it's not just like you'd be mad anyway. Yes. But now it's like, this is all I have left. That's why she lost it so much at the pitcher. She didn't say you broke the pitcher. She said, you broke Mr. Paris's pitcher. You know, it's clearly that's what it's really about. So you can kind of forgive those.
And then, you know, they make up, they make nice.
Yep. Right. But I see where you're going. So now this is her third outburst.
So he's now doing some investigative work, getting a bit of testimony from her.
Yes.
Right. And he pulls the knob off the TV. Yeah. And then she loses her full mind.
Yeah. At this point, it's the end. It is the absolute last straw, because it came right after a truce. That's why you think that's why you think she'd be more like, okay, Columbo. Okay. But no, she just full on. She doesn't say anything but the word out over and over and over and over again.
Maybe she's just like, man, I just want to sit down and watch some TV.
Absolutely.
All I've got is this soap opera. I'm real sad. You know, like this is all I want to do. My nephews who I've raised don't visit me anymore. You know, and it's like, I just want to watch this show. And then this happens.
And then in the because she was like really happy. He's like, look, I can save you some money. I had to learn how to fix TVs myself. And he immediately pulls the knob off. Now, to rate her outburst, I think they're escalating. But I think the first two were still reasonable for somebody in her circumstance. Yes. And the fact that Columbo was so completely wrong.
Yes.
But this last one, it was an accident. It was a minor thing. She was going to have the TV fixed anyway. By the way, those knobs, because we had a set not like that, but those knobs would pull off all the time, and you just push them right back in.
Okay, I think I remember that.
But even if it did actually break, that was over the top. She was literally screaming out, kicking him out over a TV knob. And that really was over just a TV knob. But like you said, maybe she just wanted to watch TV. But I have to say that last one was definitely more comedic than anything else. There wasn't really much behind that, except that it was funny that they had a truce and he immediately blew the truce by pulling the knob off of the TV. Now Columbo's out of the picture for a little bit, because now it's all about the lawyer and the nephews.
Yes.
So the lawyer starts by telling Norman that there was a will made that nobody knew about. The victim wanted to reassure Lisa that he didn't think she was after his money.
Right.
By writing a will giving her all his money, whether they got married or not.
Yes.
A little convoluted, but basically, yes, that was his way of saying, look, I know you don't care about the money. I know you don't care so much that even if we don't get married, you'll still get all my money.
Right.
She didn't want any of the money. That was the whole point. She didn't want the money.
Right. So it is kind of it's a gesture, but I was going to say it's a jerk move by the uncle, because this guy, now I understand she looks like Julie Newmar, but he meets her, becomes a health nut, and then bequeaths her his entire fortune when he does have other people in his life.
He does have other people in his life. On the other hand, Dexter is useless and Norman's pompous. So, I would say he has other people in his life who've kind of made their own bed too. A lot of these old folks, a lot of these old money folks are, look, I'm wealthy, but what's that got to do with you, kid? You know, it's like you've got to, stand on your own 2 feet. I'll help you out here or there.
Yeah.
But don't look at me like an ATM decades before ATMs were invented.
I was just going to say, don't look at me like I'm a bank open until 3 p.m. 4 days a week.
One spends more than he makes, and the other is a degenerate gambler, essentially. I mean,
who has not spoken to his own uncle? We know that the twins don't talk to one another, but the uncle also doesn't speak to Norman. Or vice versa. I guess Norman doesn't speak to the uncle.
Yeah. We did find that out because they weren't even sure from the very first scene with the uncle whether or not Norman was going to come to the wedding.
Yeah.
So the lawyer is talking with Norman, told him about the will, and said, look, there's only 3 copies of this will.
Yes.
One you got in your hands. The other your uncle had, but I now have. So basically, the lawyer has 2 of the 3 copies of this will, and the only other copy is with Lisa herself. And the lawyer says, if I could trick her into giving me her copy of the will, we destroy them essentially. Everything goes to you and your brother. All I'm asking is not an unreasonable ask. As far as not really blackmail or extortion, it's more like he's offering something. He's basically saying, hey, I can get you guys $1.5 million each.
Yeah.
If all you have to do is just promise to keep me on as the family lawyer and business manager.
Right.
And sign a contract to that effect. So that's what he offers Norman, who immediately signs. And then the next scene is the lawyer talking to Dexter and telling him the same thing.
Yes.
And Dexter says, yeah, I'll sign, just you need to get that will back from her. And so the lawyer in front of Dexter, and even while Dexter picks up a second line, calls Lisa.
Right.
And he frightens her by basically saying, hey, you're a prime suspect, even though Columbo told her the exact opposite.
Right.
But because this will exists, saying that you inherit the money when the old man dies, whether he marries you or not, that's going to make you look like a suspect. I know that you didn't want the money. I know that you didn't want to kill him, but the police are going to think otherwise. And truthfully, they probably should,
And that's why now we as an audience are clued into why she also was somewhat irrationally defensive when she was getting interviewed by Columbo earlier in the episode.
Yes, we finally understand what Columbo accidentally said to make her upset.
Yes.
Because he said, you're not a suspect because if he lived and you married him, you would have inherited all the money and that would have made you a suspect. Now we finally find out toward the very end of the episode, she was getting the money when he died, whether she married him or not. So it now all of a sudden could have made her a suspect again.
So I have a question. I don't know if this is the right time to have these questions. I have a lot of questions.
Yeah.
Since she really didn't want the money.
Right.
Well, all right, I'm getting ahead of myself.
Yeah, we're getting there anyway, because I think I know what you're going to ask, because I have the same question.
Okay.
So she says, look, I don't want the money. I never wanted the money. Yeah, come on over and pick up the will.
Yes.
I don't care about it. Basically the lawyer's saying, I'll hold on to it for safekeeping in case the police come by with the search warrant. She says, that's fine. Come and take it. Little side note, her telephone is very similar, if not the exact same phone that Batman would call Commissioner Gordon with on the TV show. It was this bright red phone. So I don't know if it was the same one, but it certainly reminded me of it. And so that's it. So Dexter was impressed with the lawyer, and they made a time. The lawyer said, I'm going to stop by at, I can't remember if it was 4 or 5 o'clock, but it doesn't matter. He set a time for when he was going to stop by her place to pick up the will. Dexter heard it on the phone.
Yes.
The lawyer goes over to her place, presumably hours later. She doesn't answer the door, but it's unlocked. He goes inside. Looks like there's been a little bit of a scuffle, not the usual Columbo let's wreck a room scuffle, but a little bit of a scuffle. And the will is just sitting there on the coffee table.
Yes.
And the lawyer picks it up. He keeps calling her name. And then he goes out onto the balcony where we saw her exercising earlier because he hears police sirens.
Yes.
And he looks down over the balcony and he sees her body in the parking lot surrounded by ambulance crew and police. And so she is dead.
That's sad. That's
sad.
They made it pretty clear in this episode that she did actually just love that guy.
Yes.
And she really didn't want the money.
Right.
And she was really looking forward to a nice life being married to him. Yes. So it is sad. And then when it was all said and done, she's like, yeah, take the money. I don't want anything to do with this. I'm walking away from this now. I'm going to process my grief and walk away from this.
I don't want the money. Take the will. It's fine. I don't want any part of this. I certainly don't want to go to jail over this. I don't want to be considered a suspect. And then they kill her anyway, so the lawyer takes the will and scurries out of the room right into a police officer who says, what apartment did you come from, sir? And then it was a very extended look of, oh, golly gee, you caught me. That was kind of funny. That went on for like probably 5 seconds longer than it should have.
It was funny, though.
But it really was funny. Because at first he was like appropriately stunned that he ran into the cop. And then he was like, oh, yep, you got me. Kind of shaking his head. Okay. So that was just funny. I would have trimmed like 5 seconds off of that.
No, I liked it. Keep it up.
No, it was good. So then we see, and this is a lot, and I notice as we review these episodes, there's a lot more of, and then this happens than I was really expecting, because then it's just now Columbo once again taking out the power, once again infuriating Mrs. Peck because she was watching TV, and this time it was an older lawyer and a younger lawyer having almost the exact same conversation that the older and younger doctor had. So again, they're really poking fun at these older TV shows. And Columbo is timing himself with a stopwatch, running down into the basement to change the fuse.
Yes.
And we don't know much more about it except that Columbo insists that the TV is going to be okay to Mrs. Peck as he's running out the door because he's now done what he wanted to do. And she turns on the TV and the color once again turns purple. Yes. So she is furious.
Yes.
Again, not wrong. I mean, he wrecked her.
He could have warned her. I think if he said, hey, I'm running this. Look, even when our electric company comes to do work in the neighborhood, they let they're going to shut off the power.
Yeah, so that you can unplug her TV so it wouldn't have gotten wrecked again.
Right. So I don't know if she got it fixed in the interim, but I mean, she must have gotten her TV fixed.
She did because it was a normal color. Yeah, no. When he pulled the knob off, she obviously had to call a TV repairman, which she was going to call anyway to fix the color.
Right.
The knob was back on. The color was normal. Columbo took out the fuse and power to the house. She turned on the TV again. It was purple. So he wrecked the TV again. Mm-hmm. Now Columbo comes back to the house, but he sees the TV repair truck in the driveway and he holds his head. He's like, oh, God, the TV wasn't okay because he swore the TV will be okay, I promise. And then he sees the TV repair truck. And then he looks at his cigar and flings it.
Yes.
So he finally learned.
Done. Yeah, I know. Yeah. Third time's a charm, I guess.
Yes, honestly, he finally figured that one out. Walks up to the house. Mrs. Peck answers the door, which was starting to really give me vibes of the butler in Dagger of the Mind, constantly answering the door to everybody asking about an umbrella. And before she says anything, Columbo says, I'll pay for it. I'll pay for the truck while he's right here. I'll pay for the TV. I just blah, 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 blah. But you got to let me in. And again, of course she has to let him in. He's a homicide detective investigating. He's a lieutenant in a homicide department investigating a crime. She does let him in. Norman and Dexter are there, and they're kind of already divvying up the property in the sense that I think Norman says, you can have the Degas, I'll take the Rembrandts or whatever,
I wrote this down because it was hilarious. Okay. It's important that it's not a Degas, it's a Picasso, because Norman has the sickest burn of any Picasso critic I've ever heard.
You can have the Degas, I'll take the Picasso. Yes. And then Dexter said, you wouldn't know a Picasso from a Rorschach test. And Norman says, does anybody?
Yes.
But I know what they're worth.
That.
That was actually a really good line that sums them kind of both up, is that Dexter maybe is a little more about the art, or at least wants to put down Norman that he doesn't know about art, which is probably more accurate. And Norman's just like, cha-ching, this is, this, I know what they're worth. I don't care what they are. I know that they're worth. So in addition to having all of these antiques, he also had at least one Degas and one Picasso.
Right.
So that was a lot of money. This was
Which in today's artists are Banksy and I don't know who the guy would be.
And that's sad that there aren't.
Thomas Kincaid? Just kidding. Oh, now
Leroy Neiman. So, well, all right, we don't need to give them their own sick burns. They didn't do anything to us.
Yeah, no, poor Thomas Kincaid's just painting a house.
You should paint a house for real. They are there talking about divvying things up. Columbo enters the room. They said, "What are you doing here?" And he says, "I think I'm here to make an arrest."
Yeah.
And they said, "You think?" And he's like, "Well, just come on up to the bathroom." So we go up to the bathroom. Columbo's lying in the bathtub and says, "Okay, I want you to try and get me out of it, Norman. I want you to lift me out of this tub. I'll just stay here like this." And of course, he can't. Columbo's too heavy. There's no good leverage. Mm-hmm. And Columbo said, "That's right. You can't get me out of the tub.
Right.
And I'm dry. I'm clothed. It would be much harder for one person to lift a wet, naked corpse out of the tub. You can't do it by yourself." So he's already laying the groundwork for there had to be two people doing it.
Right.
Then he fills up the bathtub with water a little bit, pulls out a mixer, plugs it into the wall, and tosses it in the tub. And again, destroys the TV.
Like, that demonstration didn't need to happen because everyone knows what happens when you drop an electric appliance in water.
Completely unnecessary experiment. So Columbo shorts out the TV. And this, by the way, was after the TV was just repaired. Because remember, the repair guy was there again. So he had just fixed the TV. She was just watching yet another identically worded soap opera. And the TV goes off. And I think she even says, "I'll kill him."
She does say that.
Yeah.
She exactly says that.
And then Columbo is now, after it's shorted out, Columbo and everybody runs downstairs. They run down to the basement. They change the fuse. And Columbo says, "Well, that took 67 seconds. Mm-hmm. But the TV was only off for 20 seconds. Now, she told him, this was a continuity error. She told him 20 seconds, and Columbo said, in this scene, the TV is only off for 15 seconds.
Okay.
Now, not really a huge deal, but it was different.
Yeah.
It was a different time. But either way, much less time than anyone could possibly get down to change that fuse. What would have happened was the power would have gone off. She would have tried to put the TV back on, and it would not have gone on for 40 more seconds.
Yeah.
As opposed to just going on the moment she turned the light on and then turned the TV back on.
Right.
And that's because not only did there have to be two people to get the victim out of the tub, dry him off and put that damp towel in the hamper, and then take him downstairs, dress him, and put him in the gym. So now you're talking about carrying a body down a flight of stairs, and not only getting him out of the tub, but down a flight of stairs into the gym. And there had to be one twin waiting by the fuse box so that when the other one killed the uncle and shorted it out, that the second twin could change that fuse that quickly. And that's why it was only a matter of seconds instead of over a minute before the power came back on.
Right.
Mrs. Peck realizes that Columbo is accusing the twins of collaborating, I guess conspiracy, to commit murder. And she says they wouldn't do that. She starts to lose it again. And that's really kind of heartbreaking because they did do it. And so you see their different personalities where Norman, again, is brutally honest. He's like, well, what's done is done. We did it. Pretty much. He didn't use those words, but he basically said that. And Dexter's saying, "Shut up." He's still like, it's a great theory and probably true, but shut up.
Right.
Dabney Coleman escorts them both out.
While chewing gum
And looking cool. Columbo really kind of tenderly escorts Mrs. Peck away.
Yeah.
And it's one where it doesn't end on a freeze frame. It ends with them walking away from frame as the credits roll. And that's it. That's the episode.
Yeah.
And with that, we have now watched the third in our Vulcan trilogy. So let's go on to our segments, and we'll start with when do you think Columbo knew?
How'd you know?
I suspected you 10 minutes after I met you.
This is tough for me personally, because we've had another episode like this where it's like, well, what did he know and when? You know, like, what did he know and when? So is the question, when did he know that a nephew is murdered?
Right. Okay.
The uncle? Or when did he know who murdered the uncle? Because I would say knowing that the uncle was murdered by a nephew, namely Dexter, was pretty early on.
I would agree.
But knowing that Norman was involved, I think is almost last minute.
It's very close to the end, and I would agree with pretty much everything you said. I think he knew it was murder right away, even though I can't say immediately, because he thought, oh, it was just an old man who had a heart attack. But once he went up to the bathroom and realized the towel, the damp soap, the tub, and that the uncle had exercised, and then nobody mentioned this bath, which Columbo clearly sees somebody took. I would say at that point he knew, because right after that he asked for the autopsy. So I think he knew that early that the uncle was murdered and that it wasn't a heart attack.
Yes.
I think he knew that it was the nephew that did it because, as we said earlier in the episode, the fiance, as far as Columbo knew, had the worst motive because she was about to marry a $3 million estate. You know, we know she wasn't in it for the money, but anybody else would see, you know, she referred to it as May in the lap of December. Honey, it was more like February in the lap of December.
Wait, can you help me with those? Because I know that's a May-December relationship. I always have such a hard time when I hear that. Is that just because they're about 6 months apart? Is that why they do that?
No, it's because the metaphor is stages of life. So if somebody's a May, December, it means that she's maybe halfway through her age and he's toward the end of his life. So that's what May, December always meant.
So it's more like baby New Year father time relationship. Okay.
I think in this case that probably is a little closer to that.
But no, you're right, because it's also one of those things where with this uncle, if it's not, the only people that are set to inherit anything would be his bride-to-be, which would be Lisa.
Right.
And as far as Columbo knew, they weren't married, so she wasn't set to inherit anything.
That would have, if we were going monetarily and under normal circumstances, this would have been the worst thing that could have happened to her, leaving out the fact that he was a man she loved. But just as far as inheriting an estate, him dying hours before they were getting married was the worst possible thing. In fact, it would have had to have pointed to whoever else inherited.
Right, and that really just leaves a nephew, because Mrs. Peck would have no interest in having the uncle be deceased, because one, we don't even know if she would be set to inherit anything.
Right.
And two, she lives there, right? This is where she lives.
Yeah, I mean, she's a live-in housekeeper apparently for obviously decades, because she, quote, helped raise those kids.
Yeah.
So, you know, she's been the live-in housekeeper, but also ran the household domestically.
We just walk into a bit of a messy family dynamic.
Yes.
That's really it. We don't know, you know, what happened to their parents. We don't know how he's related on the father or the mother's side.
Yeah.
You know, we don't know what happened to if maybe he's a lifelong bachelor. Maybe this is his first marriage.
Absolutely.
We don't know anything.
Maybe he's a step uncle. We just don't know any of it.
Right.
We don't know any of it. We just know that at some point before this episode started a long time ago, there was a familial nuclear bomb and the brothers aren't talking. The one, Norman, isn't talking to the uncle. He's kind of out of all of their lives. And yet we know that the uncle was the most proud of Norman because he has a, quote, normal job as a vice president in a bank. These are little things that we found. He didn't say it, but the lawyer did. It's kind of tough.
The lawyer said that the uncle really didn't say much of anything because he showed up, he did some fencing and then immediately got electrocuted.
Yes.
So what the uncle did say is that he was hoping to talk to Norman again because he hasn't spoken to him in some time.
It implied that it's quite a while.
So when did Columbo know? So here's what I think. I think Columbo knew there was a murder when he did that really sophisticated soap test in the bathroom, where he just picked it up and it was like one of those water snakes. It just like slid right out of his hand.
Yes.
And he's like, oh, that's a wet bar of soap. That's weird. So I think at that point he knew it was murder.
Yes.
And then through deduction, he only knows of one nephew.
Right at that point, yes.
I don't know if he knew about a brother, but he knew of one nephew.
Yeah, I think he might have known about a brother, but that brother was so out of the picture that he might not even have considered him part of anything.
So he knows about Dexter and Dexter's flat feet. He knows that Dexter would obviously be somebody that would not want his uncle to get married to somebody who's May. Now I know what this means. May to his December. Right. Because of course she seems like a gold digger. How could she not?
Right. I
mean, really. I mean, we're not talking 10-year difference here, or 15-year difference. We're talking decades.
For all outward appearances, she absolutely would have to be seen not only as a gold digger, but as someone swooping in at the last minute.
Yeah.
Because he was an older man. I'm not saying that he was going to die in a week anyway.
Right.
But the fact is that both nephews had a reasonable expectation that they would be inheriting this fortune, which now is going to go to another woman who would have no reason to give them anything, as part of that, especially if the uncle didn't have a will, which they didn't know he did.
This gets a little off topic at this point.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. When the nephews plotted this murder, they knew that Dexter had a pretty strong motive because he seems like a spendthrift, and to keep his hands in his uncle's pocket after the uncle got married might be a little challenging.
I agree.
Okay. And then with Norman, do you think it was an intentional lie on Norman's part to Columbo and saying, I'm financially independent, I have no motive, I would just embezzle, but guess what? He was 300 grand in the hole at one casino. So he did have a motive. So I think they had to establish motives for both of them. So it was a little confusing which brother would actually be the murderer.
Well, here's the thing about that. I think that Norman lied to look bad.
Yeah.
He didn't pretend to have a gambling problem.
Oh, no. I didn't.
Okay, good. I just wanted to clarify.
If I said it that way, that's not what I meant.
I don't know that you did say it that way. I just wanted to just really clarify that Norman has a motive because he is a gambler. He's been going there for 3 years. He owes them all this money.
Right.
Dexter has a motive because although he makes money, he doesn't make enough money and he's spending more than he makes.
Right.
So if your question was, did Norman purposely lie to Columbo at first to get caught? The answer, I believe, is yes. I do think that Norman purposely lied so that Dexter could catch him in the lie with Columbo.
Yes.
For the purpose of letting Columbo think that they are both equally potentially or needing to commit murder. Because if only one of them is focused on, I think it would be much easier to prove the case.
Yeah. Well, it's like splitting the vote, right? You kind of muddy the waters because with the murder standard, it's beyond a reasonable doubt. It's not by the preponderance of the evidence or whatever that threshold is. With murder, it's beyond all reasonable doubt. Yeah. So if you have an identical twin with a motive as well, that's pretty hard to prove.
Yes, is especially when they are as identical as that. I mean, they're so identical they're played by the same guy.
Columbo inexplicably knew that it was a mixer specifically that was dropped into the bathtub. So, I mean, he said or an appliance, but I mean, he was right with the mixer. Yeah. So at first I was like, okay, basically by the time Columbo went on Paris's cooking show.
Yes.
I think for sure he really believed it was Dexter, and he was just waiting to sort of prove it somehow with that mixer.
I think so, because he was pursuing the fact that Dexter had ordered 2 extra mixers for his show.
Right.
Both of which were accountable, which means that he probably just went someplace else and paid cash for a mixer that he did toss in there. And in fact, he had to buy a couple of extra mixers because one was a test run. Mm-hmm. One was used in the real murder. I think it was because he was suspecting or leaning heavily toward Dexter as being the actual killer that he was asking about a mixer. Because don't forget, it was only after the cooking show, only after he asked about the mixer, that Dexter took Columbo to see Norman gamble. So up until that point, Columbo didn't know that Norman had a motive.
Right. Okay. Columbo knew right away when he saw a wet bathtub that something was off. So
Yes.
I would say he suspected murder as soon as he called for an autopsy.
Yes.
And then I guess also thought Dexter was the only one that would stand to benefit from his uncle's death at that moment.
Yep.
But then when Norman was introduced to the mix, I don't think Columbo had a clue which one of them did it until the very, very end.
I think it took him to do the testing, the running downstairs, the realizing that there absolutely had to be two people.
Right.
And that obviously it would be these two people. But I agree. I don't know if he figured out, and I still don't know if he's figured out which one pretended to drive away and wave to Mrs. Peck and which one stayed and which one went upstairs to commit the murder and which one went down to the basement to change the fuse quickly.
Right.
Columbo seemed convinced that it was Norman, who was dressed like Dexter, that waved to Mrs. Peck and drove away, while Dexter himself stayed behind and turned off the burglar alarm so that Norman could come back in the house and the two of them could commit the murder.
That does make sense because Norman, dressed as Dexter, didn't ever have to enter the house. He could have just been outside waiting in the car.
Yeah.
And then Dexter could feign leaving the house and waving goodbye to Mrs. Peck. But they didn't seem nervous that Mrs. Peck stuck around. Stuck's not a word. Stuck around. Geez, Adrian. So when they left, as far as they knew, she was eventually leaving for her sisters, but she just happened to stay home while the murder was occurring.
Yes, getting caught up in the soap opera. That was kind of funny. She put on her coat and she was about to go, and then she got distracted by this, amazing soap opera.
Sat back down. Yeah.
And so that's my question too, because the fuses would have had nothing to do with the original plan. If she was going to her sisters, it wouldn't matter if a fuse blew. They would be the only people in the house with a dead body. So they could just take their 67 seconds to go downstairs and change the fuse. They wouldn't have to have one wait there. So my guess, and again, this is something that we have to come up with, but I feel like they improvised the fuse part when they realized that Mrs. Peck was still staying. And maybe that's why the one brother peeked in the window and said, "Oh, wow, she's still there watching TV."
Okay.
And
you know what? That makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
Everything else was done the same way, but I think they thought, "Oh, wow, she's watching TV. This power is going to go out. You better wait in the basement and change the fuse, brother." Yeah.
What did you think of their plan?
I think in terms of a murder plan, I think as usual, it got a little more complicated than it had to.
Yes.
But I think it was pretty good. I mean, anytime you have an old man who seems to have had a heart attack, or you've actually induced a heart attack, that's not a bad plan. I think they might have done better to just leave him in the tub and say, "Oh, he had a heart attack in the tub." And then I don't think we're getting an autopsy at all.
I think you're right. I would agree with that, because the fact that they tried to clean up where the crime actually occurred was the downfall.
Absolutely. And I guess you kind of said the same thing, but the fact that this man had exercised, took a bath, and then exercised some more is what completely got Columbo on the case. So had he died in the tub, Lisa might have still said, "Hey, he was too healthy to just have a heart attack in a tub."
Yes.
But Columbo wouldn't have had anything to be suspicious about. They probably wouldn't have even had the autopsy to say he died of ventricular fibrillation. I think they did the typical mistake that every killer has made, with the exception of Beth in Lady in Waiting, which is they had a good plan and then they made it a little more complicated. That's exactly it. I think Columbo knew there was a murder right away. I don't want to reiterate the whole thing. I'm just simply going to agree with you. What I'd like to talk about, this doesn't normally go into this section, but I think it kind of applies. Why on earth did they kill Lisa?
I have a postscript to that question.
Okay.
Why on earth did they kill Lisa and frame the attorney? Because he did lead Columbo and the team in the right direction. He's like, this is what happened. Like he squealed like a bird. I get killing Lisa and killing the attorney, maybe, because now they're scorched earth. There's nobody left behind.
Yeah.
But I don't know why they killed Lisa, because she, quite frankly, was frantic, and they heard her frantic on the phone.
Well, that was my point, is that Dexter heard her on the phone panicking about being arrested, saying, I don't want the money. So there's no doubt in Dexter's mind that they can get that will. She says, take this will from me. And that Dexter knows how panicked she is and how she just wants no part of anything anymore. She was not a threat to them because she didn't know anything. She was not a threat to them financially because she didn't want anything. And even if she did, they were going to get that will and destroy it. So no matter what, she was not a threat to them at all. So then it's like, did they kill her to frame the lawyer? Because it seems that way.
That's really my question, because here's who knew about the secret early will. It was Lisa, the attorney, and then I don't know when the twins found out about her will. I don't know if they knew before they killed their uncle.
I don't think so. I think they found out about it when we saw the lawyer tell them both about it, after everything. Because if they knew that she was going to get the money when their uncle died, even if they didn't get married, then how would that affect their plan to kill their uncle? It's almost like, oh, it's too late. Once that will is made, their plan was too late. So why even do it at all unless they could get their hands on that will and kill the uncle before the marriage? So I guess that was your question. Did they know about the will? Okay.
I don't think it changes their plan all that much because she's still dead. So I think that why did they kill her if she didn't want the money? I guess she just knew about the will. But then again, but
so did the lawyer.
That's what I'm saying. So then why not also kill the lawyer? That's what I don't understand. I get I mean, I don't like that they killed Lisa, but I get killing Lisa. I don't understand why they would frame the attorney, who now is definitely caught. They absolutely set up the attorney to be arrested to make it look like he murdered Lisa.
For no reason at all.
For no reason, nothing.
Like he had absolutely no motive whatsoever to kill Lisa.
And then why, when whichever brother killed Lisa, Norman, I'm assuming, or Dexter, but I was assuming Norman because he was out of the picture when they were talking to her on the phone.
Right, but they made a point of setting up the appointment for hours later in the day, so it could have been either one of them.
So whichever twin killed Lisa, also, why wouldn't you just grab the will? Because that's what you need. That's what you need. Because that gave the lawyer proof that this was left to Lisa and that they had somebody had an interest in her being dead. And again, who has an interest in her being dead? Who would benefit from her being dead? Only the nephews.
Absolutely.
At that point.
The lawyer, again, it comes back to the lawyer has no motive. He's crooked. He was talking about destroying a will that he drafted. So he's not he's maybe a great lawyer if you're a crook. He probably would have continued to make them millions of dollars as a business manager.
Right.
But he had no motive to kill Lisa.
So
and you're right. They just made a horrendously powerful enemy. They got this man who was willing to basically violate the law to make both of them wealthy.
Right.
And that he would just keep a little piece for himself as their business manager, which they would need because neither one of them are good with an estate.
Right.
And they went from that to making him, like you said, sing like a canary once they brought him into prison to say, wait a minute, look at this will that I just stuffed in my pocket before the police officer arrested me. This is what I was trying to tell you, that the old man made this will. Those boys weren't getting anything, but they didn't know about it until I just told them now. You're right. They just basically handed themselves to the police on a silver platter by framing the lawyer. Whereas I think most people, if they didn't kill her and frame the lawyer would have happily got the will. Lisa would have been happy to give him the will. I think everybody would have kept their mouth shut because every one of them had a reason. Lisa was scared. The lawyer could financially benefit. the murderers could financially benefit. And I think maybe years down the road, they might have been afraid that she would talk. But
but she has no evidence because the wills were gone.
Because the wills are gone.
And who would believe this fantastical scenario in which someone possibly 2 decades younger wasn't in it for the money? Right. So if she doesn't have possession of her own will, then she could just talk. There's no proof. Yeah. So I guess also what they could have done would been to not kill her, but have the will be exposed, frame her for murder, because then she is the only suspect, and then they're set to inherit if she goes to jail. But none of those things happened.
No, not at all. I'm going to chalk this up to what they've done in many episodes where you kind of get, and you don't maybe like the murder, but you get the original murder to a degree. But then it's like, oh no, we have to really despise these guys. They killed this completely innocent woman who just simply fell in love and was not interested in the money, was no threat to them. I honestly forgot that they killed her. That's how little it made sense to me when I rewatched the episode and when the lawyer walked in the room, like, oh wait, that's right, they killed her.
They did kill her.
And just because it makes no sense.
It doesn't
whatsoever.
make any sense.
So now we come to the part of the show where we discuss, will it hold up in court?
Tell me, Doctor, how do you catch a man like that?
You don't?
You're probably right.
Now, this is kind of bizarre. I think we have a case where either one of them could have done it. We know that they both did it.
It's tough because there is that statute where if someone, you don't have to directly kill somebody to be charged with murder, right? So if you're a conspiracy to commit murder, and in some cases they'll treat it just the same as murder.
I know from all of my legal knowledge of watching Law and Order that it's felonious homicide, that basically you committed a felony and in the process of committing a felony somebody died.
Yes,
and so it's and it certainly is. I don't know what the laws were in 1973, but absolutely is conspiracy to commit murder. The two of them conspired to commit murder. So whichever one threw the mixer, it may not matter as much. I don't think that you could just say, well, we're helpless, we can't figure out who did it, you both go free. I think it stands up, maybe not necessarily as murder one, but certainly as conspiracy to commit murder. Like, I think they're doing jail time.
I think they'll do jail time because Norman did basically admit, but I guess he didn't. That's always my argument to your argument. Yeah. He did not say, I killed my uncle, right? But he did basically say, all right, let's get this show on the road. I'll hop in the back of the cop car, get these cuffs on me. So, and also he didn't say any of that, but no. But I think it's really true. When you have multiple defendants, it is hard to figure out who you're going to charge with murder, if not all of them. Right. And what proof do we really have? We have Columbo, who I don't know what this would be considered, but when they were at the casino and he allowed Dexter to act as Norman to acquire information that was pretty damning information towards a motive for Norman, I don't know if that's dirty police work or not. I have no idea. Yeah. And I don't know if that would affect the outcome of a trial in any way.
If the motive gets dismissed, let's say that he wasn't allowed to do that. Let's say that as a police officer, he should have said, wait, cashier, this is not actually Norman Paris. You know, we really don't have a right to get that information. Then, therefore, we don't have a motive unless you then get it the right way and get a warrant and say, hey, he owes that money. But he didn't get it the right way, and he didn't get a warrant. He allowed Dexter to deceive a cashier to find out how much Norman owed the casino. So if you throw that away, that throws away his motive, unless you then go back after the fact. You can't go to the casino, but maybe you go to another casino with this picture and say, hey, it was here, blah, blah. So if you throw away the motive, that might make it more difficult. However, even without that motive, you could still charge Dexter for the murder and Norman for conspiracy or accessory, because we need the two. There has to be the two people, and he proved there had to be two people.
But really based on what? Because Mrs. Peck thought that that her TV went out for roughly 20 seconds.
Right.
And it's not like it's the difference between 20 seconds and 4 minutes. 20 seconds to 67 seconds, it's long enough to bother Columbo. I don't know if that's long enough for Beyond a Reasonable Doubt.
Right. Okay.
You know?
Yeah. And I guess it's just could one person drag the body out of the tub, down a flight of stairs, and on the exercise bike? And I guess you could maybe convince a jury if Norman really wanted to throw Dexter under the bus, because my whole thing is, how did Columbo know? Like, we saw Dexter impersonate Norman. Right. We never saw Norman impersonate Dexter.
No.
So that's why I feel like Dexter had to be the one doing all the interaction with Mrs. Peck. He's the one who made the tarts. He's the one who was talking with her. That had to be Dexter, because I don't think Norman had it in him for that.
Okay.
So I think that Norman is the one who dressed like Dexter, got in the car, and drove away.
Yes.
But once Dexter let Norman back in the house, there's no way to know who did what.
Right.
We know they both carried him. We know that one waited for the fuse, but who did what?
Even under the best circumstances, that's hard to prove with any physical evidence. And this is all circumstantial. And then would be one thing if it was one person with all circumstantial evidence, but now it's two people with circumstantial evidence. And it's sort of like, how do you prove one did it? Maybe one did it, maybe they both did it, maybe the other one did it, right? It's really hard to prove that. Yeah. So I don't know how I don't think this one would stand up in court. I don't think this one would.
I think it doesn't stand up in the way that we would want it to, in the way we do our episodes, which is to say, does the killer go to jail for murder?
Right.
I do think they both get jail time. I do think there's enough. I do think that's enough that they go for conspiracy to commit murder. Okay. I don't know that one or the other is going to be found guilty of murder. I don't know enough to know, can you have conspiracy to commit murder without a definitive murderer? So I don't know enough about that. That's where I'm not sure. I'm going to agree with you that in our concept of does it hold up in court, I'm going to say no, because I don't think he could prove which one did it, because they both did. And there's just no way to know who threw that mixer in there.
Yeah.
We can say, well, he was talking like Norman when he tossed it in, but who's to say that that's really the case? And there's nobody to prove that, because the only person who heard it is electrocuted.
Right.
So, all right, let's go with that. Then I think we kind of have to go with that. I do agree, which means that we are 0 for 3 on Columbo arresting a Vulcan, because all three of them, we said reluctantly they're not going to hold up. So Vulcan's 3, Columbo 0, I'm afraid.
That is sad.
Yes, because they were all pretty vile.
Yeah, not great. Not great.
So now we get to where we can do our damage back, and that is the sympathy meter, where we rate the killers on the sympathy meter from a scale of Ruth Gordon, our most sympathetic murderer, to Dick Van Dyke, our most vicious murderer.
I have this dream, Francis. I'm working. There's a phone call, and he says, terribly sorry, but your wife's dead. And then I always wake up, and I want to cry, because you're still alive.
So we've got 2 murderers, so we kind of have to. But what's funny is that although Martin Landau does a great job of acting like 2 different people, I certainly thought it was convincing.
Yeah.
They were not on the screen at the same time as often as I thought, so they didn't have to do too much with split screen technology. But I did feel like they were 2 very distinctly different personalities, and it didn't seem particularly forced or anything. And he's a good actor. All that being said, we didn't learn really enough about anybody in this to get a judge for me as far as sympathy. As far as I'm concerned, they could both be treated the same. And I guess that goes overall to why I like Columbo as a how catch him, where we see the killer, we know who did it, and it's going to be up to Columbo to figure it out, and us as an audience to figure out how is Columbo going to catch him. And we see the flaw in a whodunit, which is he had to split his time between the 2 of them. So we really didn't get to know either of them as well as we might have known a killer in other episodes.
No, I think that's a really good way to put it, because with this, it's funny. There this was a tight episode. It was just about an hour, right?
It was the hour 14 that all of the good ones were. Yeah.
So it was a tight episode. There wasn't a lot of room for character building. So from that perspective, here's where I fall with this. I would treat them the same, because it's not like I adored Dexter and loathed Norman.
Right.
You know, it's sort of like, I don't know, they're both kind of jerks, or they're both fine, like, you know, anything like that. But I guess here's where I come from. They are going to lose a sizable inheritance because their uncle is marrying someone wildly inappropriate by society standards.
Correct.
And how could they possibly think that that free spirit isn't in it for the money? And he is so much older than her that, barring some sort of accident like her falling off a balcony, he is going to predecease her, and that all will be hers. And so that's an anxiety for you as nephews. I don't love that Norman didn't talk to his uncle for quite some time.
Right.
You know, Dexter was around.
Yeah, no, because it's very entitled. It's very entitled. It's like, hey, I'm going to kill him over an inheritance, but I'm not even going to bother to talk to him, visit with him, say hello. Why would it be? I honestly wonder, why did they think that they were going to get an inheritance, even if he didn't marry somebody?
I could see Norman thinking he would get it. No, not Norman. Sorry. Dexter would get it. They definitely made it seem like Norman's the one that's not talking to the uncle.
Absolutely.
I don't know why you would assume that you're entitled to that inheritance. So I agree. So there wasn't enough time to get to know them, like you said, for me to be like, oh, these guys are so vicious. I think electrocuting your uncle is pretty rough.
It was cold. It was Vulcan cold.
It was Vulcan cold. But I still think I'd put them right in the middle. Like, it's not, you know, sometimes it's hard for me when I think that they're really vicious, because I'm like, what is this motive? Like, none of this had to happen. Here, you know, I'm not advocating for this, please, but I completely understand the urgency and the motive. I do.
Yeah, they certainly have a good motive. That doesn't mean that they're more or less sympathetic, but they have a good motive that's at least understandable on a fundamental level.
Yes.
And there is that urgency that, from their point of view, because, and this is why I don't believe they did know there was a will, is like, oh, we've got to kill him tonight before he gets married.
Right. You're right. No, that makes sense.
So I also kind of put the middle of the road, because I thought Norman was too bland to hate, and Dexter, I don't know, he was affable, but it wasn't, you know, it certainly wasn't Ruth Gordon. And I really feel like, I'm going to put him a hair more toward Dick Van Dyke, not much at all, but just a hair past halfway on that, only because the only reason they had that motive of losing the estate and that it would bother them is because they both really dug their own graves. They really made their own beds. So if Norman was simply the vice president of a bank, he really would have been financially very stable. Yeah. It's only because he chose to continue his gambling habit. Right. And Dexter chooses to live above his means. Yeah. So, but we don't know enough about them. And that's really my feeling, is that we just simply don't know enough about either one of them to come up with a solid, compelling argument one way or the other. Neither one was loathsome. Neither one was really fantastic. And they had a motive we could understand.
And I do want to say this. It's not like I was watching it and couldn't wait for them to get their comeuppance. Yeah. Because for a few reasons now, ready? The victim we barely got to know.
Right.
Wasn't super lovable. He was fine. You know, I don't wish the guy dead, but.
No. Right.
And they weren't, even though Norman was called pompous by the attorney, I don't know if I'd call him pompous. Certainly Cassidy's pompous. You know what I mean? So when you get a killer that's really just belittling people, belittling Columbo, you're like, oh, I can't wait for this guy to get it. Yes. But there's none of that in this one. So I would put them in the middle, but like you said, a hair towards Dick Van Dyke for sure, for all the reasons you said.
Yeah. And now if we take into account killing Lisa, now I have to, nice. That's why I have to drop them closer toward Dick Van Dyke, because that was a completely not only unnecessary murder,
Mhm.
because she, I don't know why I pronounced that word that way, but not only a completely unnecessary murder, but she was no threat to them financially. She knew nothing, so she couldn't tell the police
Right.
anything. Completely unnecessary. And if her death really was to frame the lawyer, then they were colossally stupid, because that was the thing that completely undid them, to the point that, that might actually make them go away for conspiracy to commit murder, is the lawyer saying, hey, I scared her to get the will right in front of the one nephew, who then told me that he told the other nephew, so it's
Right.
so I think that's where we'll land on that.
Okay. Agreed.
So thanks again for listening, everybody. I do just want to say that I like this episode. I think it falls solidly in the middle of good, solid Columbo episodes.
Yeah, I like this one a lot.
Yeah.
I actually like this one a lot.
Yeah, it's very good. It's got a nice twist. Like, we all know of it as, oh, this is the one with the twins. But
Right.
don't forget, when you watch it for the first time, you don't know that he's a twin.
No.
So even that was a nice little monkey wrench that they threw in there for us.
Right.
This was based on a story by Levinson and Link, and Baccio wrote it. So it was a good, tight script. I'm going to go ahead and then watch a bunch of cooking shows just to get this.
One more thing.
Oh, yes.
So, did you know that approximately 30% of all twins are identical?
I didn't know it was that high.
Yeah, it's approximately 30% of all twins are identical twins, and 0% of them are Martin Landau. So he is not a twin.
He is not a twin, identical or otherwise. Okay.
He's a good actor, though.
Yes.
So I found some interesting facts about twins. I know you know all this, but they're monozygotic, which means that it's the fertilization of a single egg that then splits into two.
Mm-hmm.
So what does that mean? It means that their identical twins are same sex. They do have the same DNA.
Okay.
And they have similar fingerprints, not identical fingerprints, because in utero, in the beginning, they actually do have identical fingerprints. But throughout the term of the pregnancy, their fingerprints are very similar, but they do vary slightly.
Now, that is interesting. I didn't know that. And that ruins a lot of short stories written in the 1950s when fingerprinting, was the big thing. That's all they had. All right. Now, that is interesting.
It's further interesting because identical twins have identical DNA. You might ask yourself, a handful of identical twins. One's a little taller, maybe somebody's got moles on their face. They do have identical DNA, but the sequencing of the DNA accounts for those differences.
Okay.
So what that means is that even today, should Martin Landau and Martin Landau commit this crime, it would be, even if they had DNA, it would be very difficult to prove this in court.
Yeah.
Because with the standard forensic methods that are being used today, the identity of the DNA source can't tell the difference between identical twins.
Okay. That is okay. Yes, because that's right. They would just show up as this sample of DNA, and then they get a sample from both of them, and they both match.
They both match. So I did find a couple of real world examples of twins, of identical twins committing crime. So here's a good one. Okay, here's a good one. In 2009 in Germany, there was this big jewelry heist, and in a luxury department store, it was broken into by 3 masked men. They were caught on CCTV, and now get ready for this. They propelled down from the ceiling on ropes from the skylights into the heart of the jewelry store of the department store.
Okay.
Like Mission Impossible style.
All right. Okay.
Tom Cruise Mission Impossible style.
Yeah.
So they stole $6 million in jewelry in 2009, and a latex glove was left behind.
Okay.
They lifted DNA off the sweat inside the latex glove. But here's the problem. It led to DNA on file of someone with the last name that begins with O. In Germany, they don't publish last names of criminals.
Gotcha. Okay.
So just fill in the blank, but it's an O last name, right? And it turns out that they're identical twin brothers, Hassan and Abbas. So they were both arrested, but they were ultimately both released because it was impossible to tell who actually was in the department store committing the crime.
Okay.
It was definitely one of them. It could have been both of them because there's 3. So it was definitely one of them. Could have been both, but they're not sure who was actually in that store.
Okay.
So they were released. The jewels were never recovered.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that kind of almost answers our question about what would have happened, is that because they couldn't prove which one did it, and that was just a robbery, so they're certainly going to be more careful with the murder. Wow, that is pretty wild. So now it makes for all kinds of fun speculation. Was the brother in on it? Was he completely innocent? Like, oh my God, my twin brother's robbing jewelry stores, and here I am getting hauled into court. That's very interesting.
I do have one more I'd like to share. This is my favorite of twin criminals. They are called the Twin Foxes.
All right.
Okay, so it's the twin brothers are Albert Ebenezer Fox.
Okay.
And his twin brother, get ready for this, Ebenezer Albert Fox.
Okay, so their parents just really doomed them from the beginning. All right.
This took place in, they were born in the 1850s in England. And
well, I would hope so.
They were born.
I would hope they weren't born in 1997, the Bronx.
Okay, that's, you know what, I probably didn't need to say that. You're right. Okay, so they committed a bunch of crimes in the early 1900s, mostly poaching is what they did. But why we're even discussing them is because they had a great scheme going. What would happen is one brother would be caught, arrested, charged, and convicted of a crime. And while in jail, the other brother would come forward. And so the brother in jail is like, see, I have a twin brother. You don't know it's me. You falsely imprisoned me. I'm going to demand financial restitution. So he would get compensated, released, because it couldn't be proven that the twin did not commit the poaching act.
Okay.
And you couldn't tell who was the actual culprit. And then they would do it again and again and again and again. Not for the same crime, but for different crimes. So they would take turns getting arrested and claiming the other one did it. Obviously not in the same locale, because then obviously,
right. Yeah, the jig is up there. At that point, in
the
1850s in England, they would have just taken him out back and stabbed him. Yeah.
But I love the Twin Foxes. I think that's, talk about audacity. It's like, I'm going to commit a crime, benefit from committing the crime, get caught for the crime, and then benefit from financial restitution because I've been wrongly accused. You can't really tell me who did it or who did it. You can't definitively prove it was me, and you can't definitively prove that it wasn't me.
Yes, because even the other twin showing up saying, yeah, I did it. Well, but why wouldn't they just throw him in? Prove it. Yeah, they just couldn't prove it.
You water down the proof.
It's just a confession. Yeah, you water down
it's
the
what we
proof.
were talking about before with Dexter and Norman. It's you're watering down the proof. So you don't know.
And it would be tough to go to a jury and say, hey, because all they would have to do is say, hey, remember all this evidence against my client? Well, they said it was all against this other guy. So it's like, how good is your evidence?
Yeah, it's like equal and opposite applies to both.
Yeah.
So what do you do with that?
I like that. That's great.
Yeah, so those were the 2 twin stories I found. And I did like this episode. I've always liked Martin Landau.
Yes.
And I think he got the Oscar for playing Bela Lugosi.
See, that's what I was debating. I know he was nominated, and I think you're right. I think he did get the Oscar for that. I certainly hope he did. But since we're talking about him, one more thing. So this is, of course, our third in the Vulcan trilogy of killers who all had short haircuts and leisure suits that were all very cold and calculated. We're talking about Stitch and Crime, The Most Dangerous Match, and now Double Shock. And so a fun little fact is that both Leonard Nimoy and Martin Landau were auditioning for the role of Spock on Star Trek.
That's crazy. I must have known for a reason to call them both Vulcans. I had no idea.
Yeah, absolutely.
I had no idea that they were up for the same role. That's hysterical.
Yes, and Martin Landau was their preferred choice. He was the one who was going to get the job, but he held out for a little too much money. Okay. And so they went with Leonard Nimoy, and of course, he did a fantastic job. He is Spock. We all know him as Spock. But that, I thought, was not only really wild, but then Martin Landau went on to do Mission Impossible.
Yes.
He then left that show because he was holding out for a little too much money.
Okay.
And they hired Leonard Nimoy to take over that spot. And Leonard Nimoy's character in the Mission Impossible series was named Paris.
Oh, that's great. I had no idea about any of that.
Yeah,
That's really
that was
cool.
just some neat little stuff there. So, like I said, this is a really good episode. I know this rounds up season 2, which honestly was a fantastic season. This
season.
Because you had the first season where he really gets to know his character. In this season, Peter Falk is just full on Columbo. You know, there's no questioning of it. That's just it. He's really got the character down. And so we start season 3 and our next episode here with Lovely But Lethal, which is, I think, another really good episode. It has Vincent Price as doing a little guest spot in it. So I have fun looking at that.
I'm excited for this one. This is probably my second favorite episode coming up.
Oh, good. Okay.
I love this episode.
It is really excellent. I think it's a very good episode, too. Another one they don't play much in rotation.
No.
It was one that was not shown a lot. So follow us on, right here on YouTube at Rumpled Trenchcoat, a Columbo podcast. We're also on SoundCloud at Rumpled Trenchcoat. You can follow me on Twitter/X at Rumpled Trenchcoat. I also like to do just a little brief shout out to the Tom Gulley Show. That is a show on YouTube. He does really interesting, fun segments live Monday through Friday, starting at 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And if you're there, there's a darn good chance you're going to see me there because I do enjoy the show. I often chat in there, and I've even called in a couple of times online. So really funny. He enjoys the show a bit, and he's always been a nice supporter of ours. So other than that, all I have to say in honor of our Vulcan trilogy ending is Rumpled, the final trench coat.
I don't think that needs any critique. I've liked a few of them in a row now. I don't know how I feel about it, but I endorse that one.
I think either I'm wearing you down or I'm accidentally getting better, and I know that's not happening.
I don't know.
All right. Well, thanks.
Wait. Oh, sorry. Could it be trench coat long and prosper? That's not working out. See?
Wait, are you trying to outdo me?
Yes!
What's going on here?
Yeah, I don't know. Okay, go end this.
Rumpled long and trench coat, I guess.
Thank you. I don't know. Yours is much better. See? This is it. Don't let me do this because then I can't critique yours anymore.
I don't think so. I think you have ability when yours are even worse than mine somehow. So, thanks again, everybody, for listening. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.